I'm taking crazy pills. The Bruins' weakest organizational position, depth-wise, is right shot defense, and they hadn't drafted one in 5 or 6 years until round 7. They drafted 3 effing goalies since 2022 before drafting a right shot defense prospect. So listen, it's just a conversation, but don't act like I'm an asshole for questioning it.
You're listening to the PuckUps Podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian D. Felice.
Welcome into episode 51 of the PuckUps Podcast. I am Brian D. Felice, and thank you all for joining me. On today's show, we're going to react to the Boston Bruins draft weekend, including trading for JJ Peterka, trading away Fabian Lysell, and a very curious draft strategy. Also, could the Boston Bruins really be on a short list for this very high-impact defenseman? All of that and much more. But first things first, if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe to the PuckUps on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that you get your podcast. And to get in touch with me or be a part of the show, you can email me, info@thepuckups.com. You can tweet at me on X at @BrianDFelice_. You can tweet at the show at the PuckUps, or leave a comment on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, anywhere this show has a social media account and post content. Now, starting off with the biggest news of the weekend in terms of the Boston Bruins, it was the trade for JJ Peterka. Boston sent their own 23rd overall first-round draft pick in 2026, along with the 2028 first-round draft pick they acquired from Florida in the Brad Marchand trade, top 10 protected, to the Utah Mammoth for JJ Peterka. Peterka is a 24-year-old left winger who previously spent his career with the Buffalo Sabres, where he was drafted in the second round back in 2020. Now, Peterka is somebody that if you're the Boston Bruins, you're putting a lot of faith in when you're talking about relinquishing 2 first-round draft picks. Now, how do I feel about the trade? Well, I think it was a good trade for the Bruins, and I'll explain why as we go along here. But first things first, let's hear from Don Sweeney, who was asked about what the Bruins were thinking in acquiring JJ Peterka from the Utah Mammoth.
Don, when did you realize that, know that he was a player of that ilk was going to be available? And why do you think, a young player that talented would be available just a year after he signed a deal?
I think you guys are well aware there's been a lot, maybe even more trade chatter in the last, 3 weeks. Certainly starts in around the combine, but it's carried over. So you just felt that there was going to be some turnover amongst teams that were loaded with picks and or teams that wanted to be aggressive in adding players. Now, you never know what players are actually going to move, but you have to make the calls. And that one, materialized for us and amongst many of the other calls. And, we just kept pushing forward. And Billy was good about keeping us, looped in that it may be available. So eventually we just, they made a decision and it lined up for us.
How do you see him fitting in, and what specifically about his skill set really appealed to you in terms of how he fits in?
Speed and skill. He's got an elite shot. Probably gives us another look on the elbows in a power play situation. His power play minutes dipped a little bit last year. His 5-on-5 production has been really good. Plays both wings. Can probably play with a couple different types of centers. Help drive a line, but also complement the better guys. In situations that we're certainly trying to improve. As we said repeatedly, we've acknowledged that we're a competitive group, and our guys did a really, really good job last year. But we are trying to get deeper and add speed. Marco's talked about the forecheck side of things, and adding speed is an element that we felt we needed to continue to address internally with some of the younger players. And externally, if we could identify them.
So Peterka, I like this deal for many reasons. First and foremost, his age. He's only 24 years old. I was petrified that the Boston Bruins were going to go out there and try to find somebody who was along the same age range as Pasternak and McAvoy and both the Lindholms and Zadorov, etc. But Peterka is 24 years old, freshly turned 24 years old, which means he's really closer to the Higgins era than he is the Pastrnak era. But the beauty of it is that he helps the Pastrnak era right now. Peterka kind of hits that sweet spot of a trade acquisition that checks off all of those boxes. This is not a win now move. It helps the present, but it's not solely focused on the current core like a Vinny Trocheck acquisition would have been, or Besser, or Alex Tuck, right? Like that's why I like this acquisition, even though it comes at a pretty steep cost, which is 2 first-round picks. However, when you peel back the curtain and you look at those draft picks, how valuable are they really, right? Especially in terms of Pastrnak and McAvoy and their top players right now. Like, we all know I've been consistent on here how important I feel drafting and developing is for the Bruins. However, they have started that process with Higgins, with Letourneau. They acquire Will Zellers from Colorado. They acquire Fraser Minton from Toronto. They acquire Murat Husnudinov from Minnesota. They draft Cooper Simpson, who's a pretty promising prospect. Same with Vasek Lenar on the blue line. Like the Bruins have started to stockpile, and there's others too. Some decent prospects, from decent to very good prospects that they did not have up until a couple of years ago. So they have started that process. But the thing about Peterka is that if he was 29 or 30 plus and they traded for him, I'd be pissed. But he's young enough where he's still part of the future core. Like he's not just part of the Pastrnak era. He's part of the Higgins era, to my point earlier. I would say more so because Peterka's 24. Minton's 21 going on 22. Husadinov's 23. Higgins is 19. Letourneau's 20. Zellers is 19 or 20. So Peterka is 4 years to 1 year older than the Bruins' young core right now. And he's 4 to 6 years younger than their current top players. So I look at Peterka as a ready now top 6 forward with top line upside. And he's young at 24 years old. The 23rd overall pick this year, if there was no trade for Peterka, I would have been happy for them to take it, of course. And hopefully that would have been maybe either a defenseman like a Tommy Belisle or something along those lines who was available till 30 overall, or some other defensive prospect, or maybe it's one of the forwards that we talked about too that were available. So, picking 23rd overall would have been fine, of course. But when you bring in a Peterka, you bring in a player that you hope somebody you drafted 23 overall could potentially be one day, because Peterka already has a 68-point season to his name at 24 years old. Now, of course, he's coming off a bit of a down year with Utah, and I'll elaborate on that in a short time here. But Peterka has 3 consecutive 25-goal seasons. He has a career-high 68 points in 77 games with Buffalo 2 years ago. And in 320 career games, he has 92 goals, 105 assists, 197 points. So that's a pretty good pedigree for somebody who's only 24 years old, because the ceiling for him is yet to be reached and thought that it could be. So you bring him in. I don't think you're getting a better player at 23 one day necessarily than JJ Peterka, and that player is years away, and Peterka's right now and young enough to also be part of the next core too. So I like that. And as far as the 2028 first round pick being relinquished that the Bruins got from Florida in the Marchand trade, which, by the way, this kind of makes the Marchand trade easier to stomach. I know people are still gonna hate that trade, but the return for Marchand being a late 28 first would have been probably nothing. To get that for your captain and a franchise great's not a lot. But now you look at the pick they got for Marchand and how that was half the package for Peterka. All right, well, the Marchand trade, you turned into a legit top 6 forward now with potentially top line upside for how many years to come. He's only 24 years old. So you have to feel like the Marchand return, oddly enough, has just improved, which none of us expected because we all thought that they were going to probably take that pick or maybe trade it at some point in another package. But in any event, it makes you look at that trade a little bit differently. But Peterka has 4 years left at a $7.7 million cap hit. And when we talk about this Bruins team and what he can do for the Bruins versus what he can do or what he did for Utah, I believe that with the Mammoth, he was one of many. And sometimes when you're one of many, somebody ends up falling behind or not getting their touches or being used properly. And when I say one of many, Utah has a lot of speed and skill between Logan Cooley, Clayton Keller, Dylan Gunther, even Schmaltz. Nick Schmaltz is a pretty good player for them, but there's others out there too. And I just feel like Peterka got lost in the shuffle there. Whereas if he comes to Boston, a team that could really use his skill set, he's like one of one. He's a unique player for a Bruins lineup that could use him. So I think that with an accelerated role, or I should say an enhanced role with the Bruins, Peterka should be able to give the Bruins easily 60 plus points in his first year. I think that this past year was probably more of a anomaly for him in terms of down production. I do think Peterka's skill set, he's got a hell of a shot, great hands, great speed. He's a powerful player. I think he's only 6 feet tall, maybe just shy of 200 pounds, but he's stocky. Like he's got a powerful stride. And so when it comes to the Bruins, can he be, assuming he gets a lot of power play time with David Pastrnak, which he will, and maybe even some 5-on-5 time, especially if they're running mates on the wing, can Peterka give the Bruins at his peak, 35 goals, 35, 40 assists? Can he give you 70, 75 points? I don't think it's out of the question. So you give up a 23rd overall pick this year, which hurts a little bit, but if Peterka was 30, it'd be a much different story. He's so young at just 24 years old that it's not that big of a deal. And then the 2028 first round pick from Florida, I just think you're hard pressed to believe that would have turned into anything, because the Panthers probably will be a top 10 team in the league for ensuing years here, and it would probably be a low first round pick. Now, do you feel like the Bruins could have used those picks to package them for something bigger down the line? Maybe, but Peterka is, I think, a very, very good acquisition, because he's not just for the win now crowd. He's not just for Pastrnak and McAvoy. He's also just as much for Higgins and Minton beyond the prime years of Pastrnak and McAvoy. So that's what I like about the deal. And let's go right now to JJ Peterka and hear what he has to say about what he expects to bring to the Boston Bruins.
What parts of your game are you in particular working on, say, this summer to get back to there?
I think scoring. I think when I'm at the best, I can score basically from everywhere, making a lot of plays and taking the game over. I think that's one thing that when I'm really playing at my highest level, that's one thing I can provide for sure. I think just getting my confidence back is the main focus right now, and getting my game back and better where it was.
And have you thought about the chance to potentially play with a David Pastrnak, for example?
That would be a huge honor. I think, playing against him always was pretty tough. Watching him was awesome. So but with the opportunity to play with him, that'll be pretty cool.
So does this move alone put the Boston Bruins over the top? No, absolutely not. Right. But it is a good player. He's a good player. He's a young player. And as I said, he could be part of your present and your future. So you need players like him to get to where you want to go. So we know he's not the sole answer, but can he be part of the solution? Yes, I think he can be. I absolutely think that JJ Peterka can be. So I like the addition. As far as where he can play for the Bruins, again, I think you could put him with Pastrnak, or you could put him with a Hagens or a Minton. We'll see how the roster shakes out, especially over the next week or two between possibly more trades and certainly free agency. If the Bruins are involved there, we'll see what happens. Obviously, Victor Arvidsson is not under contract for the Bruins right now. He was in their top 6 last year. So we'll see. Do they try to trade Casey Middlestad? I don't know. We'll see here. But what does this also mean for the Boston Bruins? Well, the JJ Peterka acquisition tells me that we can probably kiss the Pavel Zacha summer trade goodbye. I don't see that happening anymore. Could I have seen it happening at the trade, at the draft? Possibly. Could he still be part of a package for a bigger, huge trade? Maybe. But unless it's some type of blockbuster where Zacha is just a small or medium part of a bigger package, then I don't think you're trading him anymore. And, to be fair to the Bruins, they never said they wanted to trade him. In fact, they said the opposite. Don Sweeney said that it's their goal to extend Zacha and that they think he's a big part of their team, which we all understand he is. And any conversation surrounding trading him, at least from my perspective, is never predicated on me thinking he's not a good player. I think he's a really good player for the Bruins with some non-optimal playoff production, but he's clearly a very important player for the Bruins. It's more about asset management. And if the Bruins aren't sure that they're going to extend him because they don't see eye to eye with Zacha's camp, then I felt as though the Bruins should heavily look into trading him this summer in what has been a seller's market. Because while, yes, you can trade him at the deadline next year if the team flounders and they're selling, that's kind of not what their plan is. So, again, if Zacha's on the Bruins through next trade deadline for whatever reason, then at that point, if he's not extended, he needs to be, because now you're going to lose him for nothing or very little. But I think the Peterka signing tells me that they're going to, at the very least, not trade Zacha. Like, they might not extend him right now. They might not extend him until later next year or whatever. He's not eligible to be extended until July 1 anyway, so we'll see if they do that. But that's one thing the Peterka trade tells me, is that Zacha, I don't think, is going anywhere this summer. If he does now, I'll be surprised. But, again, to be fair to any conversations I've had on here, I didn't foresee them trading for JJ Peterka. His name wasn't even mentioned in terms of rumored players to be traded heading into this summer. So, I mean, maybe he was in smaller circles, but it wasn't talked about really. So I talked about the Bruins maybe trying to trade for Kent Johnson or Mason McTavish. McTavish, by the way, goes to the St. Louis Blues. Olin Zellweger goes to the Buffalo Sabres. Pavel Dorofeev to the New York Rangers. There's other trades out there too that happened, but I talked about the Kent Johnson moves and the McTavish moves because I didn't know that JJ Peterka was available by Utah. They just traded for him last year and they signed him to a 5-year deal. So I didn't think he was available. So you add a player like that with that skill set to and his youth to this Bruins roster. Okay, that's a good solid addition. And the Zacha situation can play itself out over time, but I just don't think he's going anywhere as we currently speak. But then again, I could be very surprised. I'm oftentimes wrong, so we'll see. As far as other trades the Bruins made over draft weekend, the Fabian Lysell era in Boston is mercifully over. For the player's sake, he was drafted in 2021. And I remember on the Skate podcast, we had Chris Peters. We've been having Chris Peters on that podcast for some years now. But heading into the 2021 draft, we talked about who the Bruins may select. And Chris Peters mentioned that there's a kid named Fabian Lysell who has the skill set to possibly be a top 10, 12 draft pick, but maybe for different reasons could be available to the Bruins. I want to say it was Lysell a 23rd pick or 20, whatever he was. I think it was in the 20s somewhere. And long story short, so I remember, when the Bruins drafted Lysell, and it was a gamble on a skill player. Didn't work out. I think the team is to blame in large part, and I think the player is to blame in large part as well. Ultimately, I think the biggest failure here is the mismanagement of a first round asset. And when I say that, I don't mean Fabian Lysell specifically as a human, I just mean generally speaking, first round draft picks, assets, they can, even if they aren't part of your future, can they somehow indirectly still help your future? So what I mean by that is, could the Bruins have done a better job of giving Lysell opportunities to showcase himself and maybe fly, maybe sink, but maybe he does somewhere in between, and somebody around the league looks at Lysell and maybe would trade something of somewhat value for him. The Bruins just allowed his stock to plummet. And to me, that's the unforgivable part of the situation in terms of the Bruins go, because there were also times where the Bruins had opportunities to see what the kid could do for them. Like, the year the Bruins sold a bunch of pieces, they sold off Marchand, they traded Carlo and Coyle and Frederick, Brazeau, they traded all these pieces away, and they were en route to a lottery finish. And they just, they gave him a couple of games towards the end, looked okay. And, he came back to camp this past summer and he didn't really do anything. But I also was at training camp, and he was always part of the non-varsity sessions. I don't think he got his first preseason game until the Bruins' third or fourth game, which blew my mind that a first-round prospect of theirs wasn't getting a preseason game until 3 games in a 5-game schedule. So, listen, if the Bruins didn't like the player for themselves, they should have at least tried to see what he could do on teams and situations that weren't going anywhere, if for no other reason than to try to help his stock and maybe flip him for something at some point. But instead, they hold on to him. His value plummets, and they end up trading him for somebody called Ivan, who's let's call it for what it is, a depth player, fringe AHL, NHL guy from Colorado system. So it's a shame that it came to this, and I just feel like the Bruins, and they're starting to recognize it, but they got to change their ways. They have to change their ways. Mujanel's gone. Jamie Langenbrenner's gone. Not that he was part of Providence's development, but you have a lot of the problem with the Providence Bruins is that they had a bunch of journeymen over the years that were taking up a ton of ice time. And so because of that, the Providence Bruins were winning games because they're full of professionals that have ridden the bus for 10 years. And so, they're out maturing, out physicaling young prospects of other teams, but that gets them regulation wins in the regular season, but they weren't developing any true prospects through from Providence to Boston. I mean, the Bruins have one of the younger rosters in the NHL right now. I think they have a top 10 roster in terms of youth. And how many of those players were even, drafted by the Bruins? Charlie McAvoy, David Pastrnak, Jeremy Swayman, and Mason Lohrei. Those 4 players were the only Boston Bruins draft picks to play more than 6 games for the Boston Bruins last year. And Pastrnak was drafted 12 years ago. McAvoy, 10. Swayman, 8? Lohrei, 7 or whatever it is. Obviously, Minton and Husadinov are younger players, but they were drafted from other organizations. Hagens, yes, Bruins draft pick, but he's a blue chip and he got a couple games towards the end. But generally speaking, over the last 10 years or so, there just haven't been a lot of players, especially under Mougenel's watch, that have gone from Providence to Boston and been key players. So, Lysell is just the latest and greatest example of just, failed development by the Boston Bruins. Call it a combination of player and team, but it didn't work out, and that's one thing. But to let his value just plummet the way that it did as a former first-round pick, that's just inexcusable. So let's hear what Don Sweeney had to say about trading Fabian Lysell.
Don, why do you think it ultimately didn't work out with Fabian Lysell? And in retrospect, are there things you wish you guys had done differently in terms of his development?
Yeah, well, I spoke to Fabian today, and we want to wish Fabian well. I mean, obviously he's been a very productive player at the American Hockey League level. He hasn't fully grasped at the NHL level what it probably requires to play each and every night. He took ownership of that today. We took ownership that could we have done more and better in supporting him? Probably. He just he was really good. The fact that the grind and making the jump to the pro game is a lot. And he did it at an early age. He came over here at an early age, and again, we're providing an opportunity for Fabian. I think it's the right thing to do for him personally, and hopefully professionally. We're excited about Ivan, obviously, but I'll refer to his first name, and Ivan. Because he's played games, he's got experience, he's got versatility to his game. Here's a player that's worked his way from an undrafted player to a tryout to an AHL deal to playing, the amount of games now he has on a really good team. So we think there's some versatility there, and a change of scenery for him will be welcome, and he'll come and compete for a job here.
So good luck to Fabian Lysell in Colorado. I'm very curious to see what he can make of himself there, because I guarantee you guys he's going to get more opportunity probably with their organization. They're a winning team. They're a win now team, and there's a lot demanded of those players, especially from their captain and Nathan MacKinnon. So if Fabian Lysell does indeed end up cracking the NHL roster at some point for them, he'll have Nate Dogg on his ass. And but for right now, it's a lesson learned by the Boston Bruins that, frankly, I don't know why it's taken them so long. They've been a stubborn organization, I think, in terms of their own draft picks. They give more opportunity to players from outside their organization that come in, even when they're younger, than they do their own draft picks. They're just so hard on them. And I just feel like, yes, the players have to give the coaches and the management a reason not to play them, right? You have to you have to dominate to an extent, but I just feel like the league is changing. It's been changing. And I just feel like there's too many old school minds in that Bruins organization that I think the Bruins are recognizing that, and they're trying to fix that. I think the Providence Bruins going forward are going to be a much younger team where hopefully their priority is truly developing these prospects to one day be Boston Bruins, instead of just dishing out a ton of ice time to a bunch of tweener AHL, NHL veterans to rack up regulation wins, and Lord knows what that does. Here's the thing. It's like, I know that for players and coaches of the AHL, their goal is to obviously win a championship. Like, I get that. But if you're the Boston Bruins, right, what matters to you more in terms of the Providence Bruins? Turning minor league players and prospects into NHL players for you, or winning Calder Cups but not promoting players to the NHL? You see what I'm saying? Like, if you were to ask Don Sweeney, Don, would you rather the Providence Bruins not make the playoffs every single year, but every couple of years they're feeding you prospects that have now become NHL ready for the Boston Bruins? Or would you rather 3 Calder Cups in 5 years, regular season, trophies, but you're never graduating players to the NHL level. Like what matters most? What's the job ultimately of any minor league team? Is it to win championships at that level? Or should it be to graduate players to the next level? It's the latter, or it should be at least. So we'll see if the Bruins can get with the times a little bit and start to have more of a new age mentality with some of these younger players. Okay, speaking of younger players, now let's talk about the Boston Bruins draft strategy this past weekend, because as I mentioned off the top, they traded away 23 overall for JJ Peterka. Now, I want to give the scouting staff some recognition here in the sense that up until a month ago, they thought that there was a possibility that they were drafting in the top 10 and at 23 overall, potentially. So they probably did a lot of homework, right? And then Toronto wins the draft lottery. So there goes Boston's opportunity to draft in the top 10. And then on draft night, Don Sweeney trades the 23rd overall pick for JJ Peterka, along with a 2028 first-round pick from Florida that's top 10 protected. So they kind of had the rug ripped out from under them a little bit. Okay. So what are you going to do now with your first draft pick at 56 overall? You going to draft a defenseman? You going to draft a forward? Nope. They draft a goalie. Now listen, I want to have a legit conversation about this because you say something online and, you got the fans who the Bruins can never do anything wrong. And then you got the fans who the Bruins can never do anything right, all going at each other in my mentions. And it's like, listen, guys, can we just have a conversation about this and call it for what it is? It was a silly choice. It was a draft choice that, in my opinion, was poor prioritizing. I'm not doubting that the Boston Bruins liked Yuri Ivanov the most at that spot. He may have been the best player available in their opinion, but I can promise you that no other lists, no other rankings had Yuri Ivanov as the best player available at 56 overall. So you can't even tell me that argument, because what I'm about to talk about is the fact that the Boston Bruins have a strong need for right-handed shot prospects. And there are people out there who say, well, you're not supposed to draft for need, Brian. Best available, right? Okay, you're telling me that Yuri Ivanov was best available at 56 in the second round? Really? Miss me with that argument. So clearly, if you're not going for best available, and if he's best available in the Bruins' eyes, then, again, we have some serious questions for this Bruins organization, in my opinion. Now, I don't want to overreact to this, okay? But let's just talk about the fact that the Bruins drafted a goalie in the second round with their first pick in this draft because they traded away their first-round pick. If the Boston Bruins needed goaltending, that's one thing. If the Boston Bruins were fine with prospects at other positions, that's one thing. It's literally the opposite. It's quite literally the opposite. So indulge me for a second here. Because I have people out there telling me, oh, who cares? This guy is going to be, don't you know? This guy is going to be your goalie of the 2030s. By the time Swayman's retired, this kid's ready. It's like, excuse me, first of all, I understand how development timelines work. I do. Why are you worried about who the goalie could potentially be in the mid-2030s or early 2030s? Which, again, Swayman's 27. It's 2026. He could be your goalie for the next 8 years. Why are you worried about who the succession plan is for Jeremy Swayman in the 2030s, probably the early to mid-2030s at least, instead of somebody you could draft that could potentially be on your blue line in the 2020s? Why don't tell me that this pick is for that far into the future. What about the blue line in the more immediate future? Now, I know that not all draft picks, especially in the second round, hit. But why are we not taking flyers? Because your right side pipeline is completely bare beyond Charlie McAvoy, and it has been for a long time. So first and foremost, let's talk about the position of strength organizationally that is goaltending for the Boston Bruins. And guys, honestly, I was losing brain cells. I had people questioning me about the fact that the Boston Bruins goaltending wasn't even an organizational strength. I mean, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? What is their organizational strength if not goaltending? Is it right side defense? No. Is it left side defense? Better, but no. Is it center ice? Well, yes, at least actually you have some center prospects in Minton and Hagens and Letourneau. So you have depth there and promise, but you don't know if there's necessarily a true 1C there. But at least that's definitely a position that you're getting stronger at for sure. And at the wing, the Bruins are getting better too. The Peterka additions really helps that too, because Pasternak is one of the best right wingers in hockey. And I personally feel like, because Geeky plays both sides, I feel, and so can Peterka, but I feel like Peterka is a step above whatever they've had in Boston recently at left wing. So I like that acquisition in terms of wingers. But goaltending, you have at the NHL level, let's talk organizationally here. Let's start at the NHL level. You have a Vezina finalist in his prime, still in his mid-20s, in Jeremy Swayman, mid to late 20s, in Jeremy Swayman. You have an above-average backup NHL goalie in Jonas Korpisalo. You have the two-time defending AHL goalie of the year in Michael DiPietro. You have Max Lundgren, who propelled Merrimack College to their first ever Hockey East championship in school history, winning Hockey East tournament MVP honors in the process. He was outstanding. He tore up Hockey East. Simon Zahajek's a decent AHL goalie. Okay, and there's others too. So why did you feel the need to draft this kid right now over potentially a right shot defenseman? Because right now, organizationally, the Boston Bruins depth chart in terms of right shot defenseman beyond Charlie McAvoy is Henry Jokiharju and Billy Sweezy. Why are we not trying to replenish that? I understand with the goaltending, because people are like, well, maybe they'll trade Korpisalo or DiPietro. It's like, no, I get that. I get that. But only so many players can play goalie. Jeremy Swayman is not going anywhere anytime soon. And I can appreciate the fact that this kid could be a goalie of the future. He's only 17 years old. And maybe in the early to mid 2030s, he's your guy, or at least a backup. Fine. But that's so far away, and you're fine at that position. Why are we not targeting the blue line? And if your response is because you draft best available, I'm with you on that. But you can't sell me on the fact that Yuri Ivanov was best available. The reality is the Bruins picked him at 56. Their next pick, I think, was 88. And so, they just thought that somebody else may have taken him. Okay, fine. But let me give you some facts here. Dating back to 2021, the Bruins have selected 36 players in the NHL draft. Three of the 36 were right shot defensemen. And one of those three was pick 36. The last pick in this year's draft was a right shot defenseman in the 7th round. Let me give you another fact. Dating back to 2022, so over 5 drafts, the Boston Bruins drafted 3 goalies before they even drafted a right shot defenseman. Svedback in 2022, and then these 2 kids this year. were all drafted before. Finally, they drafted a right-handed shot defenseman in the 7th round this year. So, I might be projecting my confusion on this specific draft pick because it's been so long. The Bruins just don't draft right shot defensemen, and it's annoying because it's their clear organizational weak spot. It's where they have the least amount of depth. So anyway, I find it interesting. Let's hear what Ryan Nadeau, who is the director of amateur scouting for the Boston Bruins, let's hear what he had to say about the Boston Bruins defensive pipeline.
Ryan, where do you view, or how do you view rather, your defensive pipeline and where things stand on the defensive end after today and these last few drafts here?
Yeah, it's as you watch the draft go, without having a first-round pick, this was a real deep defensive draft with a lot of defensemen who went early. We were looking, thinking maybe, depending on how things went, second, third round. Again, the way we valued some of the players, it ended up going goalie forward for us there. And then we sort of had a bit of a drop-off in D. We're thinking we've got some guys that we're going to target a little bit later on that we figured we could get. We ended up, being able to draft 2 of them later. There's times we're cognizant and would say, maybe we could really use a D here. But, again, we don't want to overvalue it just to hit a positional thing that, there's different ways of filling that, whether it's through free agency, whether it's college or European free agency or just pro free agency where we might be able to backfill some of that.
All right. So I like the last thing that Nadeau said there, which is, listen, there's more avenues to add players for positions of need outside of the draft. And I agree with that. And I understand that. He mentions, undrafted free agents for, whether it's players that are in Europe or in college hockey in the States or wherever, right? And also, the draft can be a bit of anybody's guess because these kids are so young, right? They're 17, 18 years old when they're drafted, and you don't really know how their development's going to go and who could be late bloomers, who could have peaked early, stuff like that. So if you can take some time, if you can take an extra year or two to try to identify some players that are now 19 or 20 that are, undrafted or their rights are not owned by any team, and you can identify some help on the right side, sure. And the other thing is clearly the Bruins are probably going to try to add some help on the blue line this summer, whether it's free agency or via trade still. So I'm not sitting here saying, oh my God, the Bruins, they should have drafted a right shot defenseman at 23 overall to be on their blue line this year. Of course not. I know that's not the case. But when you have a position of strength organizationally in goaltending, and by the way, we've seen time and time again, the Bruins can develop goalies. And most of the time, they go somewhere else. And in some situations like Bussy, they win. They win a championship. So we know goaltending is not their problem. So why are you drafting for it? You can find goalies. You don't need to draft 2. They drafted 2 goalies in this draft. 2 goalies. Meanwhile, they hadn't up until the 7th round. The Boston Bruins had not drafted a right shot defenseman since 2021. 2021. And you have people telling me to chill out and oh no, this kid's the goalie of the future. It's okay, fine. But why I'm taking crazy pills. The Bruins' weakest organizational position, depth-wise, is right shot defense, and they hadn't drafted one in 5 or 6 years until round 7. They drafted 3 effing goalies since 2022 before drafting a right shot defense prospect. So listen, it's just a conversation, but don't act like I'm an asshole for questioning it. It's like, if we're going to have a conversation about the Bruins, it's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's not always going to be, clouds and thunderstorms. You have to be able to ask questions about what they're doing. It was objectively weird to me that they drafted a goalie, 2 goalies, when they have a Vezina finalist, a legit backup in Corpusalo, 2-time AHL reigning goalie of the year in DiPietro, Hockey East best goalie of the year in Max Lundgren, Zahaicek. It's like, how many goalies do you need? And I'm being told that this kid's the goalie in the future in 10 years. And I'm trying to focus on the blue line right now. Like, what are we doing here? So it's I know I've rambled on it a little bit longer than I probably was going to, and it probably doesn't deserve the airtime that I'm giving it because it is relatively small potatoes. It's less about the specific pick for Ivanov than it is the fact that they just don't draft right shot defensemen. They just don't. Now, something else that NATO said was that they only felt like players that were available at 56 were defensemen that may have been potentially best case, maybe a top 4 defenseman of the future, but all likelihood a bottom pair guy, or if it was a forward, maybe at most a middle 6 forward of the future. It's like, well, yeah, that's the second round. You can still take a swing on somebody and see if they become something. You'll never know if you don't draft any. So, like, I can appreciate the fact that the Bruins didn't think that maybe there was anybody good available, so they just went with a goalie because their goalie guys were high on them. But that doesn't explain away the last 5 drafts where they just haven't drafted a right shot guy. Now, obviously, of those 36 picks, obviously, there were a lot of those picks that I probably wouldn't have wanted them taking a defenseman because they needed forward help too, right? Like, I didn't want them drafting a D-man over James Higgins, right? Like, I'm glad they took a forward there. But even when they draft D, they're always left shot defense. Now, maybe that's because those are harder to find at the NHL level. I get that. But in any event, when you're looking at a depth chart of McAvoy, Yoki Haru, and Billy Sweezy, and we just keep punting on potential in-house prospects at right shot D. And I know that you can play your offside, so you could be a lefty and play the right side. I get that. But I just find it curious. That's all. So those are my final thoughts on the Bruins draft picks. I mean, obviously, they took 7 guys. They took 2 goalies, 2 defensemen, and 3 forwards. And we'll circle back on these players. I'm not going to waste too much time because none of us have really watched them extensively outside of maybe a few highlights. So if it's a non-first rounder, I generally like to wait a year and see who pops in their first post-draft season, and then kind of go from there. Right now, it's a needle in a haystack. So all you need to know is the Bruins drafted 2 goalies, 2 defensemen, a left shot and a right shot finally in round 7. Cullen McCrate was the guy of choice. And then 3 forwards, all of whom I believe were wingers. So we'll circle back on this on the 2026 draft in the future and see what happens. In all likelihood, the biggest acquisition to help the Boston Bruins in the 2026 draft was acquiring JJ Peterka, in large part because you give up your 23rd pick. So we'll keep an eye on all that. All right, now let's move on finally to something I saw online. It was an article by somebody named Aaron Portzline. He writes for The Athletic and he covers the Columbus Blue Jackets. And he wrote an article about 8 teams that could be a fit for Zach Werenski, who very much appears to be soon to be traded this summer. Portzline mentions the Philadelphia Flyers, the Dallas Stars, the Carolina Hurricanes, the San Jose Sharks, Toronto Maple Leafs, the Anaheim Ducks, the Detroit Red Wings, and the Boston Bruins. So interesting. I am not sure if the Bruins are a realistic landing spot for Werenski. I mean, maybe the Bruins could send a pretty good package to Columbus, but A, are the Bruins willing to do that? But B, I also think a lot of these teams could probably give Columbus a better package right now, whether it be more NHL-ready proven players or some high prospects or pick, whatever the case may be. I don't see the Bruins going to be able to be the landing spot for Werenski, but it's interesting that a beat writer for Columbus who's in the know has Boston among the teams that could be a landing spot for Zach Werenski. What would you be willing to give up for him? What would that trade package look like? I have to imagine you're going to have to send out a couple of legit roster players because I think Columbus wants to get better now too. So maybe it's a Lori and a Minton and a first and Letourneau or something like that. I really don't know. Obviously, anybody's going to want James Higgins in a big-time blockbuster trade with the Bruins, but at the same time, Werenski, he wants out, and he had the balls are in his court. So these are the situations where if you're Columbus, you might not be able to get the best return if Zach says, I only want to go to Boston. And I'm not saying that that's the case because I don't think that is, but hypothetically, these are the situations where you'd have to give up a king's ransom for him for sure, but maybe a more selective one if you're the buyer here, right? Maybe the Bruins can get away with, like I said, a Lori, a first, and then like maybe one of Higgins or Letourneau and a Minton or something. I don't really know. I'm not great at mock-ups, but interesting to follow. Zach Werenski is definitely going to go on the move somewhere. I don't know where. Maybe one of these teams. Of these teams, could he go to Toronto? That'd be interesting because obviously they just drafted Gavin McKenna, but he would be going there to play with Austin Matthews for sure. But Toronto just also got Darren Radish. So if Toronto in one offseason brings in Darren Radish, Zach Werenski, and Gavin McKenna, that's a pretty good offseason. Now, what would they have to give up? Probably Matthew Nyes in the process and maybe Easton Cowan and a couple first rounders, whatever Toronto has. But that would be an interesting spot. Dallas might try to flip, Jason Robertson for something and then bring in Werenski. I don't know. But in any event, I found it interesting Boston was on his list. Why would he want to come to the Bruins? Because I know there's going to be some out there say, why the hell would he want to go to Boston? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, to play with David Pastrnak is a lot more attractive than people may give it credit because he is one of the best players in the NHL. Charlie McAvoy was Werenski's D partner at times in the Olympics. Very good friends with him. Probably good friends with Jeremy Swayman, Olympic teammates. So, you never know. Never say never. If it's not Zach Werenski, where else could the Bruins possibly upgrade their blue line? Because it's not going to be through the draft. We all know that right now. Via trade, maybe. I mean, Olin Zellweger, as I said, went to Buffalo. Brant Clark stayed put as expected in Los Angeles. Rasmus Andersson clearly seems to be the easiest choice for the Bruins in terms of availability. He's going to be on the UFA market on Wednesday, and, he's not costing you assets. He's only costing you money. So we'll see if that's what the Bruins try to do. Darren Radish obviously is in Toronto. John Carlson had his rights traded to Carolina. I'm sure he'll probably stay with maybe the Hurricanes or maybe I don't know. We'll see. But there's not a ton of options. Jacob Trouba, not really loving that. So the other thing too is the Bruins only have $7.7 million in cap space right now. So they're going to have to move some money around over the coming days here. I'm looking at a Middlestad, a Korpisalo, a Yoki Haru, Corrali, Asimont. Can they move some guys like that? Can they bring back Victor Arvidsson? All these things still have to be ironed out. But with JJ Peterka in the mix, it definitely, between Peterka and the Bruins, the acquisition of him and the Bruins only having $7 million in cap space, if they are able to get rid of some cap space, will Arvidsson be their first priority or will it be a defenseman? Right? So very curious times ahead here. We'll see how it all plays out. As I mentioned, free agency is on Wednesday. So be sure to keep it here. I will be reacting to it with an episode on Thursday morning. So this week's second episode will be on Thursday instead of Friday, unless there's some other breaking trade happen on Friday or something. With all that said, enjoy the start to your work week. Enjoy the buzz and the chaos of free agency on Wednesday, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.